I'm being joined by a senior advocate of Nigeria, right activist, Mr. Femi Falana, who joins us from our Lagos studio. Thank you so much, Mr. Falana, and it's good to see you on a day as this. It's the 1st of August, the day of the very first day in the End Bad Governance protest. But give me a summary of your own take of the whole incident across the country as we have reported today. What is your own assessment?
Well, from reports emanating from across the country, while the protests were peaceful in many parts of the country, incidents of violence was recorded, very disturbing. And I think for me, we should now begin to draw the necessary lessons from what happened today. First of all, is the need for the government, and I'm not talking of the federal government alone, the federal government, the state government, the local government, and all authorities in our country, to learn to move speedily to douse tension in the country, to learn to engage people, as I did suggest a couple of weeks ago. The government must engage, the young people who are aggrieved. Like some of us who said we didn't know who the organizers of the protest were or are, the State Security Service claim to know them. And so once they have been identified, what the government should have done was to engage them. And for me, it is more urgent than ever before to begin that constructive engagement in the interest of the country. And in the entire country today, I think it was only in Rivers State where the governor came out, Governor Fubara, to address the crowd. And for the young people, you could see it on television. They felt substantially fulfilled, that at least somebody was listening to them and somebody was assuring them that their complaints will be attended to. And that should happen all over the place. And then we must also learn to stop mobilizing people to disrupt rallies. We must stop mobilizing traditional institutions or traditional rulers and some emergency organization, youth bodies, to say, oh, we are pulling out of the protest. Did you plan the protest with anybody? So the government must now begin to identify those who are genuinely aggrieved and then begin to engage them. What are your complaints? So that people will have a feeling, a sense of belonging. For me, that is key. Secondly, the security forces in our country must also, from this experience, learn to engage those who have given notice of protest. Because what the law now requires, what the law is saying, what the law has stipulated, is that once you notify the police that you want to have a rally, a public meeting, or a procession, the police shall make arrangement to provide adequate security. And that is not enough, because from what I saw on the television this afternoon, and I begin to ask myself, I'm asking myself, do we have enough? Because this was the experience the last time. Do we have enough tear gas? I didn't see any water cannon anywhere. Because when you are managing a crowd in any modern society, there must be the possibility that a peaceful protest can turn violent. Even in the most advanced democratic countries, what do? You have to fire tear gas, water cannon, so that you can demobilize those who are violent. But where we do not have enough tear gas, or we have no water cannon at all, you run into problems. And so, for me, the government must go back to the drawing table and begin to draw necessary lessons and see how we can prevent occurrence of violence. Because in this country, we have been having protests since the colonial regime. You talk of ABBA women protests in 1929, when the British colonial regime killed 55 women, unarmed women. In 1949, Iva Valley workers were on strike for better conditions of service. The British colonial regime killed 21 of them. And we can't continue like that under a democratic government of our own. And so that is why the government and the security forces must discard the neo-colonial orientation. We must see our people We must see our people as our people and engage them and ensure that the government goes out to douse tension all the time.
Mr. Falana, let me jump in quickly. Let's look at the legal framework or some of the legality or the issues, legal issues that have since now been brought into the fray. We saw that in Abuja, for example, in the FCT, there is an Abuja court that is giving an order restricting the protesters to the National Stadium. In Lagos, the Lagos High Court has restricted the protesters to two parks, the Peace Park and the Freedom Park. In Ogun State, there is a similar court order granted by the court. But we see that the protest, as much as the police and government said we do not want a street demonstration or marching on the street, it does look like the protesters move beyond the premise of the court ruling. What do you make of that kind of scenario which played out today?
Again, I think the government should have learned not to rush to court on the eve of a strike action by workers or on the eve of a protest by young people. I think it was in 2006, the NSA was going to go on strike, and in the dead of the night, another was issued by a Lagos High Court, which the then president of Nigerian Labour Congress, Comrade Adams Oshiomhole, referred to as a black market injunction. Because the difficulty with such orders is that they are never served on those they are meant to restrain. For instance, the order in Lagos wasn't served on anybody. The orders in Ogun State were not served on anybody. The order in Abuja, I even think one of the defendants, I think is said to be unknown persons. Now, how do you serve a court order on an unknown person? But likely, to be honest with you, I think with respect to Abuja and Lagos and I think Ogun, there was substantial compliance. Many of the protesters did come out to criticize the restriction. And when my views were sought, I did say yes, whereas Section 83, Subsection 4 of the Police Act provides for procession, rallies, and public meetings and protests. But if the police say sorry, or the state says we are unable to mobilize enough security forces to man enough policemen and women to man processions all over the country, yes, you may have to understand that. If they now say you are restricted, right? In Lagos, likely today, from my information, people came as far from about 40-30 kilometers away to participate in the protest in Ojota. Again, that was the venue that was being used for protests before the government sealed it off. Ditto for Abuja. Protesters were using an enclosure. The Unity Fountain is a stone's throw from Transcorp Hilton Hotel. The government in Abuja, the FCT administration, sealed it off. So people then went to the street. If the government is now coming back to say, in every state capital, we want to designate a venue, a protest ground, as is done in many countries in the world. I think that is a lesson to learn from. But don't rush to court. When you had at least 2 weeks notice, of an impending protest, don't rush to court on the eve of that protest, because even if the court makes the order, it's not going to be served on people practically. And that is why, as I said, we must be drawing some lessons from this protest. And for our judges too, there is also the need to learn to be very cautious, so that orders of court are not made irrelevant to situations in our country. Because if an order of court is not obeyed, and you are ridiculing the court, and we shouldn't allow that.
But Mr. Falana, if you see those who were at the Eagle Square, it would seem to me, legally speaking, that protesters have been forbidden by the order of court, which should be sacrosanct and which should be binding on all persons that are willing to protest. And same with Lagos, same with Abeokuta or Ogun State. And if the court says you are restricted to this place, what is the consequence? For example, if police had arrested anyone outside of those specified areas, what are the consequences?
Consequences. you know, this business of law, sometimes when you are talking politics, there are complications. For instance, yes, if anybody is arrested in the Eagle Square or outside the National Stadium protesting in Abuja, you will need to take the person to court for contempt. To initiate a contempt proceedings, you must show, you must demonstrate that the order was served on the person. But if the person says, I'm not aware of your order, it's going to be difficult. But what is important, because I did investigate, why did anybody go to Eagle Square, even when the court has restricted you to the National Stadium, Abiola Stadium? Unfortunately, my finding, it's not very good. I mean, it's not, doesn't speak well of the authorities, because there was going to be a major violent clash in the stadium, whereby a counter protest was also organized. A group that had description, had vest, wore vest, known to protest, came in about 6 lorry loads. And so these other guys who had been restricted to the stadium simply withdrew and attempted to use Eagle Square. And from my report again, there will have been a clash between apart from train of Fatiaga, there will have been a serious clash. But I understand some senior military officers who were around, appealed to the police, to ensure that peace was maintained. And that was why we didn't have any terrible incident in Abuja today. So that is what I mean by saying organizers of protests and the police must be in touch during protests. And that was why the Inspector General of Police was asking for details. Who are the leaders of the protests in each of the states, so that we can link up with them if there is going to be any disturbing, a situation. And again, as I said, we are learning. Where we are coming from is that public protests were declared illegal in the country. And those who brought that law to Nigeria, as was said in the case of MPP and IGP in Ghana, those who brought the law on protest, restricting protests in our countries, never applied such laws in their country, that is United Kingdom. So now that we are free, we must now allow our people to express themselves. If you are not able to use the newspapers or the television, you can go to the street, either for or against the government. And when that is going to be done, to make it peaceful, the security must be involved. So this is the position of the law today. But if you then go to court, you want to restrict me, you must give me notice, you must serve me the notice, so that we can also tell all the who will be participants in the protest, we have now been restricted. This is the basis of the restriction. And that is one of the lessons we have to learn from the protest.
Yeah, is day one. Someone like Ebumolu Adegborowa has advised that, look, this protest shouldn't be more than a day on the first day. And in fact, prior to this morning, there are those who believe that the objective of the planned protest has been established because government is already responding. And Ebumolu Adegborowa did advise different persons and stakeholders involved, security agencies, government, protesters, and he said one day should be enough. I'd like to know whether in your view that the objective of these protests has been served or has been communicated to the quarters that need to hear them.
My position is that even if the protests hadn't occurred today, if there had been no movement today, the organizers could jolly well say, we have drawn attention of the government and the people of Nigeria to our protests, because the government popularized the protest through its reaction. The government summoned many meetings in Abuja. The government came out almost belatedly to reel out the list of achievements of the federal government. At the same time, some officials of the government embark on a campaign of calumny against certain people who they thought were responsible for the protest. But now that the protest took place today, as I said, I didn't plan a protest. Ebumolu Adegborowa didn't plan a protest. We can only advise. But what is important is to engage the organizers of the protest. We were involved as lawyers, and usually when people are going to protest, they say, well, in case we're arrested, we would like your services. And again, when we met the IG, we did make the point. I'm not a member of the Take Back movement. But since we are invited to this meeting, we need to give advice on the state of the law, on when we had the Nigerian Labour Congress and the TUC had protests in the past, and now it was managed. So that is our duty. Now it is the organizers of the protest that the government will have to persuade to call off. And it has happened sometimes. The Nigerian Labour Congress has said we're going to have an indefinite protest. After a day, the government reaches out to them. They say, okay, we are postponing the protest to see how the government will react in the next 2 or 3 months. And we must use the same formula here. Oh, you have made your point. Young people have a way of saying, what point have we made? So, but we can say, at least this is already clearly a wake-up call for the government and on the part of the government. I'm not talking of the federal government alone. I'm not talking of the federal government alone. The governments that are closer to the people, the state and local government, must now be seen to be involved in promoting public accountability in our country. The legislators in Abuja that had a special session almost on the eve of the protest should now go beyond expressing concern and telling the protester, we have heard you loud and clear. You must now begin by saying, now that they have been asked to go to their constituency, during this recess, the legislators must meet members of their constituency to discuss their constituency projects. Where those projects are going to be located, the contractors that will handle the projects, because we understand not less than 500 million naira has gone to every constituency. Because by September or thereabout, another budget will be presented. On the part of the state governments, it's not enough to be asking for palliatives from Abuja. The state government must also move out to also address problems increasing poverty in the country. For instance, and this is why young people too, the protesters, and all of us, particularly the elite, must take more than a passing interest in the affairs of our country. Because just last week, the FAC shared about 1.3 trillion to the 3 tiers of government. That is the highest in the last 1 year. In addition to that, the federal government disbursed to 34 states and the FCT. I say 34 because Anambra and Kaduna were not involved. According to the government, the federal government, they hadn't submitted certain reports. 438 billion naira was given to the states as part of the loan taken during the COVID-19 pandemic. So the money now is now being used to address poverty in the country. So we must also engage our governors. This money that has come from Abuja, in addition to your statutory allocation for July, what are the projects? Who are the people to be assisted from this huge fund? So, and unless we have a comprehensive review of the affairs of the government, the budget of the government, not just the budget of the federal government, the budget of the state government, the budget of local governments, and then we ensure that budget implementation is taken very seriously.
Yeah. We're due for a break, but I wanted to know if the objective of the protest has been achieved.
Well, you see, for the young people, they have some demands. The government will have to address those demands. And that is why I've suggested, as a matter of urgency, an engagement with the leaders of the protest movement. So we can't stay outside and say,
engage them. How much? Sorry, Mr. Falana, I'm wondering, because if the government is saying we do not really identify the leaders of the, except Mr. Mulu Adegburua that the police have been interfacing with.
Yes.
And yourself also, there has been in the mix. In fact, that those who will say, who should we now hold accountable now that these fears of the federal government have been established, the fear that this thing might lead to violence, and we see violence in some parts of the country today, looting and vandalism. The fears of the government has been established, isn't it?
The State Security Service announced publicly. We know the organizers. This is their objective. Oh yes. Of course, one of the groups briefed our colleague, saying, can you please apply to the police that this is our route, not for permit, just information. This is our route. And it is so. There are other groups whose leaders are known to the government. And this is the time now to quickly summon a meeting of those leaders. It's not like NSAS. That was a leaderless revolution. This one, the leaders are known. They have been issuing statements, and the government has been responding to the statement. And so for me, it is easy for the government to identify those leaders, because it's not enough for us, one day is okay, the government has listened to you, the government is responding. If the organizers feel that the issues raised by them have not been addressed, then we may not be addressing the problem, so that we don't deceive ourselves.
Mr. Falana, my question here is that if the fears of the government ab initio is there could be violence, so don't do the protest. Now that there is violence, who will the government hold accountable to that? For example, in Borno State, bomb went off and people are dead now. In Kano State, they looted the NCC park and they went into the government house. In some states, there is now curfew in nothing less than 2-3 states in the country. Who should the Nigerian people or the government hold accountable when it has been foreseen that there could be violence?
Well, unfortunately, violence occurred in some parts of the country, unfortunately. And of course, I wish to express my condolences, to those, the families of those who were killed. In matters like this, what will have to happen is for the state governments involved to investigate the remote and immediate causes of the violence that has occurred. And that happened during the NSAS protest. Unfortunately, majority of the state government did not even release the reports of the judicial commissions of inquiry set up during the NSAS protest. If those reports have been released and white papers have been issued, recommendations have been implemented, there's no way we'll have had any kind of violence this time around. And that is why we must learn. For instance, one of the recommendations from the judicial commissions of inquiry is that next time that people want to protest, the government must move speedily to address their complaints, so that we won't be having protests that may lead to violence. With respect to who to blame, right, I'm not going to be able to say, blame this one or blame that, because some of them will also say, we played our part. In many parts of the country, there was no violence, or here, maybe the handling by security forces might have contributed